स्थापकाय च धर्मस्य सर्वधर्मस्वरूपिणे अवतारवरिष्ठाय रामकृष्णाय ते नमः। यथाग्नेर्दाहिका शक्ति रामकृष्णे स्थिता हि या सर्वविद्यास्वरूपां तां शारदां प्रणमाम्यहम्। नमः श्रीयतिराजाय विवेकानन्दसूरये सच्चित्सुखस्वरूपाय स्वामिने तापहारिणे। With respectful salutations to Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mother Sri Sarada Devi, and the world teacher Sri Ramakrishna, Swami Vivekananda, let us ponder over a very important chapter in the life of Swami Vivekananda, and also in the chapter of India's education of women. So, and that is Sister Nivedita. Sister Nivedita is an important page in Swami Vivekananda's life history. A Western woman coming for the work in India, especially for the education of women. The readers of the life of Swami Vivekananda, especially of the readers of his letters, they know that how passionate was Vivekananda for the education of women. He, as it were, mentioned that that's the key to national regeneration of India, the education of women. Because for over 1,000 years that part of national life was completely neglected. It was also thought that women don't need to be educated. This is actually against the old hoary tradition set by Manu. Manu mentions that the education of women is as important as that of men, if not more. Swami Vivekananda has quoted in his letters from Manu Smriti, that it says, just as the boys are to be taught from a certain age onwards, girls also have to be taught equally. There has to be complete, that equality between the education, boys and girls. Both will have to be given proper education. And in fact, he mentions that the education of girls is more important because of the particular family system in India. If a girl is educated, the whole family gets educated. And therefore, he sees that how, if we don't do it, look at what happens. Look at our society and the condition of women in that time, in about 1890s, that he is writing these letters, having seen this condition of women, making them get married at a very young age, 8, 9 years old, girl is getting married, and so forth. It really pains Swamiji's heart. And as a practical visionary, he always was looking forward to a way to set up the institutions for the education of women. He, as you can see, he mentions in his letters and even in the rules that he has set up for the Ramakrishna order, he is very clear about that a mutt has to be started for women, and that is first the mother and her daughters, the father and his sons can wait. That was how emphatic he was about it. And then as for the organization for men, he mentions that education is an important work, so also for women, that it has to be taken up in the right spirit. It should not be just a copying of the Western style of education. The Western mode of education has its merits, but it has to be given as applicable to the Indian national ideal. And that ideal is always a realization of the ultimate goal, the God realization. That has to be kept in forefront. So, a person, an instrument who can carry out this ideal had to come from West. And so he found one in this Margaret Noble. It is, when we look at the life of Margaret Noble, she was born in a Scottish-Irish family, and her father was a minister in a church, but that was not actually the Ireland's majority in Irish population is Catholic, but he belonged to the Scottish, that church, and so he was minister in a different church in the Northern Ireland. So she, of course, attended the church. She was religious in the beginning, but gradually as she learned more and thought more, she separated herself from that Christian ideology, so to say, that she did not agree with most of the biblical opinions, and so was looking for something, and then was very much attracted to the ideal of Buddha. She was very much attracted by the life of Buddha, and also by that time she had found an education system that was promulgated by one German scholar, and then it is there that she decided to merge herself in that kind of education. Froebel was his name. Froebel, he was follower of an education system where the children, right from the young age, have to be molded. Their character molding and proper habit formation was the emphasis there. So she decided to follow that model, and later she came to Wimbledon, a suburb of England. It is famous for those tennis tournaments. So Wimbledon, she came there and opened her school that worked on these methods. And while she was there, she got an invitation to attend Vivekananda's lecture. So it was by one of her friends, Isabel Margeson, that invited her to attend Vivekananda's lecture, and she attended. She liked, but her response was, like this. It was good, but there wasn't anything new. There wasn't anything new. And then the reason that she thought was in that way was had to do with the psychology, that she was not going to get sucked into that thought. Vivekananda could be good, but she will keep her discernment, intellectual faculty and questioning spirit awake, and so will not just accept things because Vivekananda says, and so an automatic reaction came that he might have spoken well, okay, many speak well, what was new in it? That was not already spoken of by others. Nothing is new. Friends, there is nothing new in the world as such. There is a famous story told of Mark Twain that he attended a sermon of a very famous preacher and afterwards told him that you gave a very nice sermon, but every single word that you said is from a book. And the preacher was, aghast. Well, it was the original speech I wrote myself, and you are telling that is as if it is the plagiarism, I took it from some book. But politely he said, it will be a great help if you can send me that book. And Mark Twain said, sure. And he sent a dictionary to him. Every word he spoke is in that book. So what I mean is there is nothing as such new in this universe. After all, we all combine and recombine the ideas. So it is true that there is nothing new. But as afterwards she thought, well, there were so many new things in that, so many ideas. Vivekananda was giving some other lectures also, and she didn't want to miss any. She attended those lectures, and always she had a very deep impression of what he said. It was a short trip of Swamiji to England. He went back to America and then came for a longer time of about 8 months, during which he gave many discourses, and now Margaret Noble was not going to miss any of it. She became so deeply attracted to this whole thought process that completely synchronized with her religious thought, her ideal of life and so forth. And yet, there were questions. She and Vivekananda had long arguments, heated discussions. It is when there is the process of absorption, especially a mind that wants to absorb very genuinely, not just glibly, it is, then there is a reaction. Just to give you an example, now people are taking vaccine to combat the COVID-19. So what happens if the vaccine is genuinely needed and is getting absorbed? There is the reaction that comes. That reaction of vaccine, if it is not too violent and is not going to kill you, that vaccine is a sign that that reaction shows that the vaccine is actually working. So, therefore, Nivedita or at that time Margaret Noble, she just kept on arguing, but that arguing was a sign of not refuting but of absorbing. The brain has to make new paths. The things were being sought but were quite new, and so would be coming to disturb all the previous thought arrangements. And that is how Nivedita or Margaret Noble's thinking process at that time was, that how can this be true? The existing ideas will be rebelling against the new intrusion, because this is how the process of absorption works. Otherwise, just meekly hearing and thinking that, well, that person has absorbed, maybe that nothing has gone in. It is just going from one ear to the other ear. No getting in from one ear and getting out of the other ear without disturbing the brain at all. So, that kind of absorption is not really absorption at all. It is when there is a response. And thus you see, Margaret Noble was receiving, absorbing, and according to this new thought, the whole psychology of her was getting changed, readjusted to the newly discovered truths. That is how the information is actually inner formation. That word gets combined like that, information. It is your inner formation undergoes a change with the new education. So that is how she became completely changed person. And Vivekananda wanted somebody to come to India to take up the work. So it is and Nivedita decided to go to India. That she wrote, I am quoting from one of her letters, that Margaret Noble writes to a friend, much later, but then what happened in 1895. The letter was written much later, in 1904, to her friend, but she is writing about what happened in 1895, that how she was influenced, that it is, suppose he had not come to London that time, life would have been a headless dream, for I always knew that I was waiting for something. I always said that a call would come, and it did. But if I had known more of life, I doubt whether, when the time came, I should certainly have recognized it. Fortunately, I knew little and was spared that torture. And still that torture was there, friends. That had she known much more, the torture would have been much more. So she was spared the torture because she says that I knew little and was spared the torture. Always I had this burning voice within, but nothing to utter. See, what a beautiful expression. That I had this burning voice, but nothing to utter. How often and often I sat down, pen in hand, to speak, and there was no speech. And now there is no end to it. The door is open, so it now is flowing. So, as surely I am fitted to my world, so surely is my world in need of me, waiting, ready. And this is just the inner and outer, matching the inner and the outer. That I am looking for something, and that is also looking for something in me. When that matches, then it becomes a union. Like somebody seeking a carpenter and a carpenter seeking some work. When they match, then it happens. It is otherwise it doesn't happen. There is somebody who is there with the skill of carpentry, but I have no work for that person, then that won't work. So, or if I am looking for somebody, a carpenter, and then I am met by goldsmiths and these other painters and whatever, not a carpenter, that won't work. So the need and then the supply both should match. So, and so she continues that it is, as surely I am fitted to my world, so surely is my world in need of me, waiting, ready. The arrow has found its place in the bow. But if he had not come, she is imagining how the life would have been. This is, a figure of speech to see how much impact that particular incident has made in her life. Had he not come, nothing of it would have happened. That is, so coming and meeting Swami Vivekananda was such a big turning point, that there is the material, but a spark has to come. Had that is not been, well, there was no use of all this. It is that is how she explains here. Vivekananda, when she later expressed that she is willing to do education work in India for women there, he was naturally very happy, but he wanted to first of all give her correct idea that what she is getting into. First be aware of it. And that was very nice, that the letter he wrote to her, that you are welcome, but see, there are no amenities that you are used to in England to be found even in the big cities of India. You have to work amongst illiterate, poor, who are habituated to live in dirt and most unhygienic situation, and yet you should not run away from it. Rather, you should be lovingly working for them without criticizing them. So that is, later on, when Nivedita, she expressed some displeasure and criticized certain customs, Vivekananda scolded her in very bitter terms. Do you dare to, criticize this? It is your view. That doesn't mean that they should conform to that. They have their philosophy of life. What is bad about it? And then she understood that it was a big blow in the beginning to her, but she got many blows, The process of molding at many times is to give powerful blows. If the metal to be molded is strong, it needs to be, heated like steel. You have to heat it and then give hard blows to mold it. If the steel is not wanting, imagine, to withstand it, the molding will not be possible. So therefore, it is all very important that Nivedita was such a material. And we can keep on, looking at her, the tremendous contribution she made to the that domain of women's education. And she was a firebrand worker. So she also fought for the freedom of India. There are some of these incidents that I will mention in this short talk, that her the Vivekananda's letter, that it is who is going to join this army. The earth's bravest and best will have to sacrifice themselves for the good of many, for the welfare of all. That was Vivekananda's call, and she heeded that call. And then he told her he wanted them to be educated, these women of his country. He turned to Margaret Noble and said, I have plans for the women of my own country in which you, I think, could be of great help to me. But also he gave her ample caution that she is going to get into. And then after she came, there were these, after a few days, she knew that she has not come there to India for sightseeing or for some personal meditations and meeting people, but she had a mission. The school had to be started, and the school was started as soon as almost in a few months the school began working. That was in Calcutta. She was introduced to people of Calcutta in a meeting by Swami Vivekananda. He called a meeting of eminent people and introduced Margaret Noble. And on March 25th of 1898, he initiated her into the vows of brahmacharya, means a lifelong celibacy. That is not really a proper translation of the word. Brahmacharya should actually, it means, is holding on always to Brahman, the highest goal of humankind. Dwelling in Brahman all the time, that is the meaning of brahmacharya. Chara means to move. Where? In Brahman. That is brahmacharya. So, it is not just celibacy. Celibacy is an essential aspect of it. But that doesn't make anyone brahmachari. It is the holding on to the ideal of realizing God, dwelling in God, that makes somebody a brahmachari. So, she was initiated into that at Nilambar Babu's garden house. So, that is how. So, it was on March 25, 1898, at Nilambar Mukherjee's garden, Swami Vivekananda formally initiated Margaret in the vow of brahmacharya and gave her the name Nivedita. Nivedita excelled in organizing these educational institutions. She was a good administrator, good teacher, and so in spite of lot of difficulties, you can imagine people would not be sending their little daughters to get school. They were worried if they went to school, how could they be married? It will be difficult to give them in marriage and all that. But still, in the face of all these difficulties, her work progressed. She did not leave a stone unturned to get the girls to her school, went to all devotees, knocked at their doors. These things change, that it is those days they had the problem how the girls, if they get educated, would get married. Now they think people how the girls would get married if they are not educated. So it is a full circle, as it were. But she also conducted this, the education was on Indian lines, the lines of the ancient Indian tradition and the ideal placed by the lives of Sri Ramakrishna, Holy Mothers and Vivekananda. In Nivedita's life, it is a wonderful chapter to see her relationship with Holy Mother, which continued even after passing away of Swami Vivekananda. On a very special note, it is something that one needs to deeply meditate upon. Vivekananda's message to Nivedita was for the rejuvenation of the country, and then she participated in many of these works that Vivekananda initiated. Especially many of you might not know the starting of this Indian Institute of Science by Tatas. That the letter of Swami Vivekananda to Tata mentions about this education, the technical education, scientific and technological education to be spread in India. And so Tata decided to build this in Bangalore. It is one of the prime education institutes in India now. But British government was not giving permission. Sister Nivedita went from office to office to allow this, pleaded, and then it could be done. Her efforts in that direction, very important. She went all over India giving lectures in different colleges and other places to encourage people to get into all this educational philosophy, heart, head and hands, the simultaneous and harmonious growth of all this. Especially she encourage people on the lines of Swami Vivekananda, saying that first build your muscles. You will understand Gita better by playing football than just sitting somewhere. It is more important for you to play football than read Gita. So she emphasized in many of his lectures the importance of this building physical strength. So anyway, friends, it's we need not keep on talking about these things, but it is a matter for study and meditation for everyone. It is a glorious chapter in the Indian history that Nivedita is stepping into this scenario in women's educational field. So we conclude here by salutations to Swami Vivekananda again. Tam deshikendram paramam pavitram vishwasya palam madhuram yatindram hitaya nrinam naramurtimantam viveka anandamaham namami.